Hello and welcome to the Business Intelligence Methodology presentation by Instant Business Intelligence. My name is Peter Nolan and I'm the founder of Instant Business Intelligence. In this presentation today, we're going to take you through the history of the methodology, how it came to be about, what experience is embedded within this methodology. We'll then take you through an overview of the methodology, the various phases that get executed in the new methodology, and we'll go through discussion points on the methodology. Well, I want to say that this methodology is brand new, and when we say brand new, we mean we are still working on it. We've spent quite some months recently going through the process of understanding what's now possible with the new tool suite that we've been developing over recent times, and we've decided to make some quite substantial and quite radical changes to how we do our projects going forward. So the way to think about the business intelligence methodology is a little bit like this. I want to take you through the history of it, because by knowing the history of it, you'll understand the value of it. So I personally undertook my first data warehouse project in 1991, and it was something of a disaster. The first 3 months were very stressful on that project. The mistake that I made, the biggest mistake that I made, was considering that everything I know about how to develop computer systems up to this point in time should stand me in good stead. I had been a developer for 8 years, and I was the youngest system architect in IBM Australia during that period. So I thought that what I knew would stand me in good stead for building a data warehouse or a business intelligence system. That was the mistake. And for some years I carried a presentation around Australia saying mistakes I have made on business intelligence projects to educate other people about how they could avoid these mistakes, and relying on your experience was one of the biggest mistakes you could make. As luck happened, in 1993 I was introduced to the Metaphor consulting methodology, Metaphor being the company founded by Ralph Kimball. They based their methodology on a book, and I can't remember it exactly. I think it was called the Consultant's Methodology Handbook or something else like that. It was a handbook for professional consultants and how they manage their business in consulting engagements. And Metaphor had been insightful enough to use that methodology in developing their methodology for business intelligence. I used that methodology a little bit, and I understood it, and it had some great ideas in it. And I talked to many people who had used that methodology. In 1995, I was actually asked to write a BI methodology for SAS out in Australia. It was to be just a relatively small, straightforward methodology to be used by the SAS Institute for delivering business intelligence systems. And I had quite a few friends over at SAS at the time, and this seemed like a perfectly sensible thing to do. And so I spent a few weeks building them what was at the time a quite straightforward, sensible methodology. Little did I know that it would be further developed and used by SAS worldwide. Certainly I didn't get paid for that, but it was an interesting experiment. In 1997-8, I was exposed to the PricewaterhouseCoopers Business Intelligence Methodology. It was actually built by my old mentor from Metaphor, and so it was quite familiar, and as per usual by PricewaterhouseCoopers, it was very in-depth. And I delivered a number of projects for PricewaterhouseCoopers using the PwC Business Intelligence Methodology. When I moved on to Ardent Software, of course I was exposed to the Prism Iterations methodology, and these two methodologies from PricewaterhouseCoopers and Prism were definitely the Rolls-Royce of methodologies. And Prism's solutions could actually sell the methodology to clients, and I was the professional services manager who was selling the Prism Iterations methodology and hiring consultants to train customers to use these tools and techniques to increase the probability of success on data warehousing projects. From 2001 to 2005, I was exposed to the Sybase Systems Integrators methodology. This was based on work by Sean Kelly and Earl Haddon, and it was specifically geared to the Industry Warehouse Studio product and to be used to train systems integrators as to how to implement that product. Now, all these methodologies had their strengths and weaknesses. None of them were perfect. The ones which were the strongest, of course, was PricewaterhouseCoopers and the Prism's iterations methodologies. However, they were also the ones that required then the most work to implement those methodologies and to use those methodologies. I used the Prism iterations methodology, in fact, in Saudi Telecom, and that went down quite well in Saudi Telecom. The Sybase Systems Integrators methodology was not robust enough for such a large and complex project as what we did in Saudi Telecom. And so I used these methodologies as well as other software development methodologies, of course, in my development days. And from all that information, it seemed to me that there must be a nice way of building and packaging a methodology for instant business intelligence. Now, with the advent of CTL and BI for all through 2005 and 2011, we've been working to these older methodology techniques, and with Sean Kelly and associates, who I've been working with for some years now as well, we didn't really build a formalized methodology with which to use with clients. So over the last year or two, we've been thinking about it might be time to look at the whole methodology question again, particularly in the light of the fact that we have new tools and new techniques, and we can do things differently now. Our experience and tools give us an opportunity to build a methodology that's different. So let's talk about the methodology that we've built, and it is different, and we've made some radical changes in processes. Because of our experience and tools, we are able to work smarter, but you will find some of these ideas somewhat challenging. We are sure that as we go out to clients and we talk about the way in which we propose to do our work now, that we will meet resistance from clients as to how we do that. What's driving the change in how we're proposing to do methodologies? Well, basically, CTL now allows us to map data far faster, far more than ever before. CTL allows us to build ETL subsystems at approximately half the cost of anybody else. So if we can build ETL subsystems at approximately half the cost of anybody else, what most customers are now looking at is saying to us, well, take as much as you can in the budget that we have. You guys will do more than anybody else. So the more data we have in this data warehouse, the better off we are. And also with these new tools like Netezza and Sybase IQ and these sort of very fast databases, it's possible to put a vast range of data into the data warehouse, and to do that without too much regard for whether the data may or may not be useful. We're now looking at taking data and putting it into the data warehouse as almost an act of faith that this will be useful when it comes time. Our data models allow us to design databases and data warehouses faster than ever before. The experience that we're seeing is that the customization and implementation time dedicated to the data model itself is about 20% or 5 times faster than what we were able to achieve even when we were working at Sybase with the Industry Warehouse Studio. The tool that we used at Sybase for Industry Warehouse Studio was the Sybase Power Designer tool, but we're also familiar with all the other tools like Irwin and such. So we decided to do our data modeling in Excel, which is another radical idea, and in doing so, we are able to do data modeling approximately 5 times faster than what we could do 5 or 10 years ago. The data warehouses themselves covering more areas of data, more complex data than ever before. We recently did a project where we worked for a telephone company, and we took 4,000 fields from 3 different operational systems into the data warehouse, and we did it in less than 6 months. And the customer told us that the price for ETL performance that we had built was approximately 5 times faster than their prior best effort. And this was a large company that was definitely very good at building data warehouses. And so to be able to outperform their previous best effort by a factor of about 5 is really quite something. And that customer has made that comment publicly. Now, with this ability to get data into the data warehouse, into data models, much faster than has ever been previously possible, the temptation is to take more data and to put it into the data warehouse. And this has created a new problem for us out on the leading edge, and that problem is there's just too much data to comprehend. It's very difficult to understand the depth and breadth of information that is coming at us, even in industry segments that we are quite familiar with, such as telephone and retail. So now we've changed the focus of the methodology to focus on understanding the data, because the other issues around building data warehouses are ostensibly solved. We know it's just a matter of applying time and effort to these other areas like ETL and data modeling and applications built on top. We know that we can solve any problem that we might come up against in those areas. We know there's nothing that can come up that we don't know how to deal with. However, in large complex organizations, we don't know all the data that this organization has. We don't know how it's encoded. We don't know how it's going to be delivered to us, and this has now become our biggest problem. So our experience in various industry segments, in particular telco and retail, also tells us what the most important pieces of information are. So we have moved understanding the data to the front of the project. We are putting far more focus on creating prototypes, and we've moved requirements back in the process, and indeed in some cases we don't look into requirements all that hard at all. So let's take the methodology phases. There are 4 phases which are kind of outside the methodology itself, but need to be explained. We do a thing called prototype presentation and proposal. This is when a customer does not know what business intelligence will do for him, and he would like to see some kind of prototype built for him, but he knows that he has to pay for the time and effort to get the prototype built. We will charge about 20,000, depends on the client, about 20,000 euros to build a prototype and then present that prototype back with a proposal. And if the customer goes ahead with the project, of course the investment is deducted as a discount off the overall project. If the project does not go ahead, the customer pays for the time and effort for building the prototype presentation and proposal. Basically, it is a service offering to educate customers on what's possible with business intelligence now, and the fee is only there to stop people wasting our time. Phase B is where a customer or a systems integrator wants us to be involved in a tender response, and we have a certain set of checklists and methods that we go through for tender responses. At the end of projects, we, in business intelligence, do internal project reviews, and this is not a customer-facing review. There is actually a phase for customer-facing review, but we also do our own internal reviews on projects. Across all projects and across all phases is of course project management, and project management is one of the most important activities in a business intelligence project, and it's more important than in general operational systems build projects. So those are the 4 phases which are kind of external to the step-by-step phases which happen during a business intelligence project in the new methodology. So phase one, what are we proposing now as phase one? And I say proposing because we've not run this methodology yet. We've built it, we think it's good, and we're going to run it when we get our first client using this methodology. So phase one is hardware software installation for the pilot. We are now saying to customers the very first thing you want to do is go grab yourself a fair whack of hardware, a fairly significant machine, put on it a fairly fast database, even if it happens to be MySQL or something else like that, or go see the database vendor and get them to give you a monthly license charge or something for using their database for the prototyping phase, and then get the hardware and software installed for your pilot, particularly the database hardware and software. Phase two is going out and finding all the data within the organization that looks possible or likely to go into the data warehouse. And what we say at this stage is don't pay too much mind as to whether the data will go into the data warehouse eventually. Just go and grab as much as you can grab all across the organization. Anything that looks interesting, grab it and put it into a staging area on this on the hardware and software installed for the pilot. Now we at Instant Business Intelligence, we have tools which take data from pretty much anywhere and puts it into the staging area with rules about how to get it into the staging area, and those tools are free. So virtually any information anywhere within an organization can be put into the staging area. If it's more complicated and it needs some decoding, we have C++ decoding tools such that anything that can be read by C++ can be decoded and put into the staging area. We have done things like decode switch information, which is binary in telephone companies, and so we have quite a sophisticated toolkit to be able to get information from wherever it's arriving from into the data warehouse. Recent developments include our profiling and analysis extensions to the CTL workbook. So what we're doing now is providing the ability to look into the staging area and run SQL over that staging area, generated SQL over that staging area, to better understand the information that's in that staging area, up to and including looking for what are the likely relationships between the tables and the data in the tables in this staging area. So phase two now, we say, is all about sourcing your data, going out, finding out what's out there, putting it into the staging area in a one-off basis, not building the ETL system, and then studying and analyzing that information, cataloging it, coming to terms with everything that's possible from all the information that's out there in the organization. This is a very different approach and a radically different approach, because what we're saying is forget about what the requirements are for a while. We know what is valuable in certain industry segments. We want to find out all the data that you have available, and we want to learn the data that you have available so that we understand what it is that we can build and deliver for you that will be of value. We expect that we'll get some resistance or pushback from making that kind of proposal to customers. The next phase three is what most people start with as phase one, and that is requirements gathering. Most consultants will come along and tell you the first thing that you need to do in a data warehouse project is interview business managers to understand what their requirements are. My argument now is that if your consultant needs to go and talk to all your senior business managers as the first point of contact and the first thing they need to do to find out what needs to be done on this project, you should be thinking about getting some new consultants. Because your consultants, if they've been doing business intelligence for an extended period of time in the industry segment they claim to be experts in, they will know what most companies in that industry need from their data warehouse project. I recently did some work for a large telephone company, and we were preparing the tender documents for a data warehouse, and the IT people told me that the business people didn't really know what they want. And this is fairly normal, and it was a fairly remote country, and so I figured, well, this is probably right, and this is what I'm being told. Now, when I went out and actually spoke to these business people, they knew exactly what they needed. What the problem was the IT people didn't understand what the business people were after. There was a disconnect in communication there, but when I came in and talked with them, they understood very well. And indeed, I had the project manager come with me to a number of interviews with senior managers and subject matter experts. And the project manager, who had been working in telco for many years, said to me, "I don't know what you guys were talking about, but it's very clear you guys understood each other in what you were talking about." And so, that gives me confidence about what it is that we're doing here. So a good consultant who's been working in the industry segment for a long period of time should be able to draw up business requirements or business objectives, business requirements, critical success factors, all the major dimensions, all the major facts, all that information. He should be able to sit down and build himself, and then this whole package of information should be taken to the business, and the business should be asked, what do you want? What do you not want out of all these things? Please take the things off the list that you don't want. And then what have we missed? What do you need that we haven't got on this list of things to do? And that should be how your requirements gathering is done mostly nowadays. So phase 4 is then the extract subsystem design. So in phase 1 or phase 2, we went out and we found all the data, and we catalogued it, and we know where it comes from, and we know where it exists. Now is the time to actually define how it is we're going to get that information out of those operational systems into the data warehouse. Phase 5 is the major phase of our methodology now, and this is where we do the detailed data warehouse analytical apps design build. Now, one of the things about our new tools is CTL is used to do numerous different things on the project. CTL defines, first of all your source to target mappings, and so the person using CTL defines the source to target mappings that can be generated into SQL as a prototype. CTL is also used for doing the data modeling, and so the data modeling is done concurrently with the creation of the ETL subsystem. This is radically different. The person typing in the rules for the ETL, who is generally a very experienced, very high-level person, and that has been my job for the last 10 years, is also the person who's saying this is how the data model has to change. All that information goes into the metadata dictionary and is brought back out of the metadata dictionary for the DBA to make the physical changes to the database, whatever database that is. So this all happens at the same time. So the data warehouse database design and build happens concurrently. There is no separate design and build phase. The data preparation and loading, the ETL subsystem, is designed and built at the same time. There's no two separate activities. This is very different to how other people do these things. Most usually, other consulting organizations will design the data model and then implement the data model design into a tool. And they will design and document ETL subsystems and then implement the design and documentation of the ETL subsystem into a tool. We skip that. We type this information into an Excel workbook. That Excel workbook is source code, which is then taken and generated into whatever is necessary. This is why the tool cuts so much time, effort and cost out of a data warehouse project, because there is no separate design and coding exercise. There is just one exercise of typing things into an Excel workbook, which can be done by a highly qualified person, and the code that needs to be executed comes out of that. 5C is the implementation of initial end-user applications. Now, end-user applications can be built at the same time all this prototyping is going on, and you will see that on the slide at the back of this presentation. 5D is then putting this pilot system in, or testing this pilot system, putting it into a testing phase, and this is still on our pilot prototyping hardware. And so we're now talking about having the end users use these initial applications, studying the database, understanding what it is they're going to be delivered, and providing some initial end user training on the pilot system. This is then rolled into a pilot implementation where more people will be using this pilot system, and then having a distinct pilot review analysis phase, which will lead into updates for this pilot system. So phase 6 is all about, we've built a pilot system, it's there, it's ready, it's available, it's populated to production volumes, it's not being updated on a daily basis, it's not gone into production, but it's very close to a production style system which can be used and understood, and for which changes can be requested, which are going to be far cheaper than once the system is put into production. The rule of thumb is that changes in a system in this state cost you about 1/10 the cost of changes to a system that's in production. So we are recommending to clients that they have a specific phase where they know that people are to look into this data warehouse that's being built, and to test it, ask for changes, come up with new ideas, apply those new ideas before it goes into production, to save the cost of doing that after it goes into production. Now, phase 7 is an interesting phase, and it doesn't always get executed, or it won't always get executed. We provide a product, ETL product called CTL. Many of our large clients have already standardized on an ETL product. The most popular two are Informatica and DataStage. And so when we do a job, we insist on using CTL as a development tool because of all the benefits that it gives us and the client. But if the client has said, we want you to go live with, for example, DataStage or Informatica, we will have a phase where we take the CTL, ETL subsystem, and we migrate it into the tool of choice, say Informatica or DataStage, and we also have tools to compare the code written in whatever ETL tool it is with the code written for CTL, so we have all this automated comparison process so that we have very little testing of the ETL subsystem. And this is so efficient that we have done things like written in one client, we wrote 130 Informatica mappings with 680 lookups in the fact tables. There was 55 fact tables and 75 dimension tables, and all these mappings were written and tested to make sure that they replicated the existing ETL in just 20 workdays. Indeed, the time it took to put all the mappings together into the Informatica workflows and to put all the conditioning into the workflows, etc., that process of putting the mappings into the workflows and understanding how all that worked and testing all that out to get it ready to go into production, that process itself took longer than writing the Informatica mappings in the first place. The reason we can do this is we standardize the mapping so much that we can take a mapping in a standardized mapping in Informatica, we unload the XML of the mapping, we edit the XML in a text editor, and then we put the mapping back and finish the changes. So a skilled developer can do about 10 or 15 dimension table mappings in a day, sometimes more, and you can do 4 or 5 fact table mappings in a day, sometimes more. So if you have yourself a little factory where people are doing these things very, very clearly, very, very repetitively, you can do things like 130 of these mappings in 20 days, which was faster than usual, but that is what is achievable. So phase 7 is all about migrating the ETL to the standard ETL tool if CTL is not going to be the tool of choice. Phase 8 is in when you buy your real hardware. So oftentimes we suggest that the prototype or the pilot hardware is what will eventually go in to be used for development. We like to have the development machine be as large as possible, and we understand that there are budget constraints around doing that. So phase 8 is where the real hardware, real software for going into production needs to be purchased and installed. There may be lead times for purchasing and installing. So what we are saying now to customers is build the prototype of your data warehouse and leave your major expenses until as late as possible, so that you get the best price possible given the rate at which computer hardware and software is falling in price, and you understand what it is you're doing in the best possible fashion. The other thing this does is if the prototype is built on something like MySQL or whatever, or even if you have some Microsoft SQL Server software lying around that you can use, what this does, it gives you the finished database. So you can go to a vendor, you can go to the various database vendors, and you can say, okay, we want a machine with your database on it for 1 month, and we're going to have 2 or 3 of you here, and we're going to pay you for this time, and we're going to evaluate the performance of your databases on this project. Or you could even challenge them and say, okay, we'll give you some money, and here is our data and our data model sitting in this database. You copy this over, you run these queries, you show us how you do all this stuff, and you're competing with your other colleagues and your other database vendors for the license for this data warehouse. By having a finished production size database for them to test against, you can have a far higher level of comfort in the decision that you're making for your database vendor. So that's what we're suggesting in that area. In phase 9, typically when you go live with a data warehouse, you don't take across large amounts of history, frequently because there are no large amounts of history available. So phase 9 is really the scale up and roll out of data for as much history as it is that you have. Within telephone companies, it's usual to get the data warehouse started up with your full complement of customers and maybe a month or 2 of CDRs. Then you may have back processing for, say, 6 or 12 months of CDRs. That's what this phase is all about. Phase 10 is the training of the larger number of users out there in the user population, and so it's end-user training in preparation for phase 11 of the rollout to the larger numbers of users. We are suggesting that during the pilot phase, the users who are exposed to the data warehouse are the people who would be considered power users, or people who will use the data warehouse very frequently. Phase 12, which is often overlooked, is the ongoing exploitation projects of the data warehouse. We typically advise clients on exploitation projects, but typically clients will say, you guys have built the data warehouse, it's now our responsibility to run the exploitation projects out of that data warehouse. We would like to be involved in those kind of projects, and we would like our business partners to be involved in those kind of projects. So we have a specific phase about exploitation projects where people will come up with ideas and proposals, Those proposals will be taken to the business managers, and they'll be told, we've got this idea, we think it's a good idea, this is how much it would cost, and here's our expected results, but it's your decision as to whether you go ahead with this, because you guys are responsible for the business. So we do that as an explicit phase, which may, of course, by the nature of it, continue on for the life of the project or the life of the company. There's always more things to do in exploiting the information in a data warehouse. Phase 13 is our client-facing review. So we will have, or we always have reviews with clients. We now are formalizing this in our methodology process to have formal client reviews at the end of a project. Now, what are the discussion points, the really important points that we want to emphasize? The really important points we want to emphasize is that the number and diversity of fields that are being extracted and put into data warehouses is now the number one problem. And there's a new issue around text and all these things. The integration of that data is the number two problem, because you can't integrate it until you understand it in the first place. And the writing all the integration rules is a very significant problem in and of itself. What we are doing now is pushing the vast majority of this work into the database that the staging area sits on. The machines and databases have gotten fast enough with things like Netezza and Sybase IQ that you can push this work into that database, and it can perform the vast majority of things you want to perform. If it can't perform something, then we can always fall back on C++. So fast databases like Netezza and Sybase IQ mean that you can go out into the organization, you can collect sample data, you can get it loaded onto your fast database machine very quickly, and you can analyze this information very, very quickly. So that's the major discussion point of get information onto that test machine as quickly as you can and start analyzing that information. We've moved data analysis to the front of the process. You can see by phase 1 and phase 2, and we discussed that in the slides previously. What we are suggesting to clients is that it's a really good idea to get production level volumes of data into the staging area as soon as possible, and to run our new data profiling tools over that. Now, we understand that it's not always possible to get a pilot machine that has the sort of capacity that is production volume capacity. That's understood. Given that it's understood, we're recommending that is a good way to go ahead in any case. Where you can't get production level volumes, even if it's going to be slow, then do away with some of the historical transactions, but have full reference data for things like customers and products and addresses and contracts and all those kinds of things. We're saying that only after the data has been profiled and the consultants have come to understand that data do we go into the requirements phase. And by this phase, we should have a very good idea about what it is we want to produce. In industries like telco, retail, web and media, a great deal is already known as to the industry standard requirements. We are doing things a little differently in the build phase as well. We now know that when we build a data warehouse, we're going to have to build the base layer of a data warehouse according to the BI for all models and as non-lossy data models. So we know when we come into a large client that we're going to take virtually every transaction that we can find in that client and map that into the base layer of the data warehouse and place a set of keys on the front of it and create what we call the mesh of relationships between these transactions. So we don't actually have to go and ask any business people, do they want this? We know they need it. The model describes how to do it, and so we know that we can start that mapping process on day one. We know we can go into an organization, we need all the accounts payable, the invoices, invoice lines, CDRs if it's a telco. We have a vast array of information we know we need right from the very beginning. So we might as well get started on that, because it's not going to change no matter what the business people say. Following on from that, we then build derivation fact tables as needed, which may be shown up through the business analysis. The everything is connected to everything is a feature we have of our data models and the way in which we build our data models. The way to think about this is we build a large number of links between our fact tables. Every fact table gets a unique integer key as well, and we build a large number of links between these fact tables. This creates what we call the mesh, and the mesh means that we can ask this database questions and transverse our way around this database through this mesh of joins through integers. And this means we can reliably ask this database any question that the database can possibly answer. And we put these kind of keys also on derived fact tables and summary fact tables. So we know we can do all this build of the data warehouse prior to talking to anybody in the business. So we know we can get people started on this work right as we walk in the door, and we don't have to put that onto the critical path. The speed of mapping development and the prototype development means that 4,000 fields or so is quite a feasible 1.0 data warehouse. If you had told me 10 years ago we're going to start building data warehouses where version 1.0 is 4,000 fields, I would have rolled around on the floor laughing. Even more so 15 years ago. 10, 12 years ago, doing 1,500 fields, this was a really big data warehouse. 1,000, 1,500 fields for a version 1.0 was a big data warehouse. Another innovation we have is using stored procedures as an optional extra, not as a replacement, to turn the data warehouse into a question and answer machine. Now, stored procedures being used in this way make any tool able to access those stored procedures, and the results from the stored procedure is reliable and consistent no matter which tool you query that stored procedure from. And we propose that the business people are heavily involved in the prototyping stage and that full production volumes are used at the prototyping stage. This gives us a chance to alter, to keep changing and changing and changing and changing the data warehouse, adding better and better and better ideas right up to going into production. In fact, one of my clients, one of my now very good friends, Peter Brook, who was a project manager on one of our recent projects, as we got closer and closer to the date, Peter became more and more stressed, saying to me, when will you ever stop changing this thing? You know, it's good enough now. Let's go with what we've got. And I kept changing and changing and changing and saying to him, don't worry, we know what we're doing, we'll hit the date, but these changes that we're coming up with, these changes are adding very good value to what it is that we're delivering. And so we want to do them before we go into production, because we know that if we leave them until after they go into production, they're going to be much more expensive and time consuming to do. And so there was a balancing act for how many more changes could we make before we went into production. Once the prototypes are accepted and agreed to be deployed, we migrate the ETL to the standard ETL tool. Report development begins as soon as early portions of the ETL and data model are delivered. The emphasis is that it's far easier to accommodate changes, and later releases are far easier to accommodate as well. Indeed, in one of our clients, and we've never done this before, this is a first and unique, as far as we know, is that when the operational system changes go into production, the changes to the data warehouse go into production on the same night. Why is this unusual? because before the production changes go in, that data does not exist. You only have test data. So virtually everyone agrees that, and we have always agreed, that when changes go into a production system, the data warehouse lags 6 to 12 weeks behind changes in the production system, so that you can get decent sample information about what the data looks like in production, rather than using test data, which is oftentimes fairly poor information, and oftentimes doesn't really reflect what's going to happen when those changes go into production. So to have a client that is going, I think, 3 monthly releases, they have like a 3-month window. They put their production upgrades into production on about a 3-month basis. The data warehouse is going into production on the same night with the changes linked to the production system. That is really quite something. That is how much easier it is to manage the changes to the data warehouse through the whole CTL methodology. Now, there is a metadata dictionary, there is a detailed manual on that, and that's used throughout the project for control and analysis, and we can now establish fairly well data lineage right through from field on a report back to source system through the metadata dictionary. And the way we do this is using part of that metadata dictionary as a documentation tool for reports which may exist. One of the issues with all the reporting tools is they don't necessarily tell you or make it easy for you to find out which field on a report comes from which field inside the data warehouse, because the report tools can do derivations and things like that. And so we've now rolled out an extra workbook which documents reports and therefore can help us in the data lineage exercise. Now, these following two diagrams explain the situation in a little bit more detail about how it is that we are able to do things a little differently. The second diagram I'm not going to go through. You can read it and understand it for yourself. So first of all, the traditional development approach for a data warehouse is, you do some requirements, you do your model design, your data mapping, your ETL design and build, you build some applications. It is not until you've done your ETL design and build that you have data and on which to build your applications. So we're doing our model design here, and we're doing our application design here. Now, what always happens is changes are desired, and if we are coming up with our changes here, they get put into release 2.0, or they never get implemented. Well, with CTL, we do our requirements here, and as I've said, we are now doing data analysis up in even before our requirements. We do our model design, data mapping, ETL design and build here. We can start our application build as soon as we've got some data coming through from our prototyping. At the end of all this build, we may convert CTL to whatever tool that is desired, and we can apply changes as we learn from our application build. So what we've done is fundamentally collapsed this process into a concurrent process with the application build staggered off the build process, while the conversion to whatever ETL tool that the company wants to use is performed. Now, some companies stay with CTL and they implement CTL into production, and that's fine, we like that. Many of our large clients implement data stage or Informatica, and we're fine with that too, because we get to manage that process. The most important thing is that the conversion of the ETL subsystem and the building of ETL is no longer on the critical path, and it's not a prerequisite for having data for testing with. This is, to say the least, a radically new idea and a radically different way of building data warehouses. I did want to put in one slide to provide you a perspective on BI methodology techniques and ETL complexity. As models have become more complex, and you can read through this. You can just hit the pause button and read through this rather than me talk to it. Data modeling has become more sophisticated, and our models are very sophisticated, we would argue. The complexity of ETL, generally speaking, has gone up. What we have found with CTL is that although the complexity of the ETL has gone up, we have simplified it using design techniques and templates and pushing queries into the staging area, that much of the ETL complexity has been soaked up inside the way in which we do these things. So if you were doing it in another ETL tool, then the complexity can be quite complex if you don't use our templated design techniques. And we have had experience of that with a large client who decided in their wisdom not to use our templating techniques, and the migration process of the CTL ETL to Informatica was quite time-consuming and expensive. So what did we talk about? In this presentation, which has just gone 51 minutes, we gave a short history of my experiences with a variety of methodologies that I have used over the years. From all this experience of all these different methodologies that we've used, we, IBI, decided that it was time to create a methodology of our own that leveraged the tools that we have and integrate the methodology with the tools that we have. So we have a bundle which we know leverages the value and strengths of the various tools, such that we can deliver data warehouse projects and BI projects faster, cheaper, with a higher level of success than anybody else can. So we talked a little bit about the history of the methodology. I took you through the major phase steps. Of course, we can provide you with documentation of this in much more detail for those customers who are interested. And I took you through the major discussion points of the methodology, where you can stop and think about, okay, these guys are presenting quite a radical new idea, a radical set of changes for business intelligence implementations. Here is their reasoning for it. Here is their background for it. This is something that we can sit down and think about as to whether do we want to do it this way, do we want to do it some other different way. If you want to do it some other different way, perhaps the Prism iterations way, well, we're happy to use that methodology as well. And lastly, but not leastly, we always like to do a short summary of our presentations to just provide the one-page summary of what it is we have discussed. Well, I'd like to thank you for listening to this presentation. I hope you enjoyed it, and if you have any questions, please feel free to email us or see us on our forums.